I'm going to introduce very quickly our distinguished guests, speakers of tomorrow conference. We gave a title, The Small Urban. They will discuss the title and the content, but you will understand the point in a minute. First things first. So keep in mind, coffee is everywhere. There is a cafeteria downstairs, but in all the buildings there are places for coffee. So Sciences Po is complicated. You will get lost, that's sure, but with a cup of coffee in your hand. Second, posters. Posters have to be handed in Saint Thomas and will be exposed in the cloister. So after the session, please, those who need to have the poster to show, please come to Saint Thomas, the other building across the street. And third and final, welcome again, and we start immediately. So I have the pleasure today of having here two distinguished guests from French universities, not from Paris, Lille and Clermont-Ferrand. Christophe Demazière, who is now at the University of Lille, used to be in Tours, and Hélène Mainet, Clermont-Ferrand. We asked our two colleagues to talk about the other half of our business. What is usually left behind, if I may introduce some of the magic words of the fast word that are keeping resurrecting in the discussion. Yesterday already we have been touching up the topic very rapidly, and today we will give an hour entirely to the discussion of the small urban, the small cities which are so typical of Europe and are often neglected by the policies and politics, as we realized a few days ago. But since much further ado, I leave the floor to Christophe and Hélène, and again, a big thank for your participation here.
Good morning, everybody. I hope you can hear me well. I will introduce briefly. Yeah, better. I will introduce briefly Hélène Mainet. It's my pleasure to have you here. Hélène, you are currently professor in geography and urban planning in Clermont-Ferrand, so it's south of Paris, in the very middle of the Massif Central. I'm sure that you can see very nice mountains from your windows. You were trained as a geographer with a PhD entitled Indian People in the Post-Apartheid City, the case of Durban, South Africa. But when you got an academic position in Clermont-Ferrand, so in the very middle of France, very far from any metropolitan city like Paris, Clermont is a renowned research center on small towns, and you adopted this baby. You turned to this topic. You are a specialist scholar of small towns, working on cases in France, but also in Poland, in Germany, and of course, Africa. Kenya is one of your field work. You are also involved in a master degree on planning and strategies for small and medium-sized towns, but also low-density areas, which relates to the position of Clermont-Ferrand within the Massif Central, which is a low-density and mountainous region. Research-wise, you are a member of a pluridisciplinary laboratory called Territories. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Christophe, and thank you for your invitation, because in fact you was invited first, and then you kindly asked me to share this presentation with you. So, Christophe Demazière, you are currently professor in urban and regional planning at the University of Lille, but you were well known as Tours university member before this. You received your PhD in economics and specialized in spatial planning at the University of Wales, Cardiff, and also the Catholic University of Leuven in Belgium. So lecturer and then professor in urban planning as Tour for many years. I don't check. And this is where you launch an international master's in planning and sustainability, which received quality recognition from AESOP. So you were a member of the COREP AESOP for many years, and you also chaired the French-speaking Association of Planning Schools, APERO, and were involved in the Global Planning Education Association network. So you led research extensively on urban and regional development issues in Europe and of course in France, including on strategic spatial planning and metropolitan governance and small and medium-sized towns. And so you are author or editor of many books, including Cities and Metropolises in France and Germany, co-edited with German colleagues Ulrike Grabski-Kieran and Evelyn Gusted, and a French colleague from Lille, Didier Paris, which was published by the ARL last year. And also regarding our topic of the day, you have been involved in the Espon Town project, the European Espon Town, led by Loris Servillo, and you identified more than 8,000 small and medium-sized towns in 31 countries in Europe. Last element. You also chaired an international working group on cooperation between small towns and metropolitan governments for the ARL, so this German Association for Territorial Development in the Leibniz Association. Okay, so I think we have a very qualified keynote speaker for today, and Christophe will start with the introduction and we'll try to share. We had no time to rehearse our common presentation, but we are very happy to be here. Thank you.
Thank you, Hélène. So I think we can start if the technique works. We will switch. Yeah. Okay. So we will switch to a few slides. We are going to leave the superstar cities that we heard about yesterday to try to discover the smaller urban, like Marco named it, and to start with a basic observation. Only half of the French population lives in a city over a conurbation over 100,000 inhabitants. Paris represents probably 10%, so it means that a half of the population in France lives either in rural areas, low-density areas, or in small or medium-sized towns. So France is a good case, we think, and we're going to talk a lot about France, even though we have some knowledge about other cases in Europe, but also in Africa, thanks to Hélène. So taking France as an example, we would like to explore 3 questions. definition issue of small towns, the challenges faced by such places which sometimes are very close to metropolitan cities and sometimes are very far. And the last question, what could be the future of small towns? So it's the question of their attractiveness currently and how to reinforce it through planning efforts. So I will deal mainly with the first two sections, and then Hélène will go on with the third section and maybe the conclusion. Okay, in France, there is a tradition of studying small towns due to the fact that there are many small towns and rural areas, and geographers, but also sociologists, urban planners, regional economists have all studied small towns at a certain moment. On the left-hand side of the first line, you can see the cover of a book of the most famous sociologist in France at the moment, Edgar Morin. It was based, so it was in the 1960s, a long time ago, but it was based on an in-depth study of a small town of 5,000 inhabitants in Brittany, in the very west of France. However, geographers are those who study most small towns. For instance, the research center where Hélène is based currently in Clermont-Ferrand organized a major congress in 2003 called The Future of Small Towns. So there were already questions about what was going to happen to such places. France, of course, is not an island, and when ESPON commissioned its first pilot study devoted to small and medium-sized towns, a French academic in urban planning took part in the consortium. As the bottom row shows, there has been a renewed and a more intense interest for small towns. In the last 2 decades. For instance, a colleague from Clermont, a colleague from Hélène, Jean-Charles Edouard, he convened the symposium in 2008. I took part in the ESPON project led by Loris, who is sitting just there. But you can also see that much of this work on small towns, on French small towns, has been published in French-speaking journals or French written books. So there is the issue nowadays of how to valorize this research tradition, which is pluridisciplinary, which is very interesting to approach the current situation of small towns, but an obvious challenge for the French-speaking community, including the French community, is to be heard across borders. And this challenge is probably shared by many of you who work in non-English speaking nations. And after all, we can remind that AESOP was created to overcome these language barriers and also cultural barriers. So academics from Germany, from the UK, from Belgium, but also from France, launched AESOP, and now we can see that it's a great success. Okay, but if we take the English, the Anglo-Saxon, as we called it in France, literature, what is the interest for small or medium-sized towns? We could make a quick poll. How many of you have done research on small towns? Can you please raise your hand? Okay, so quite a number, but still probably a minority of you. So thanks to two German colleagues, Anna Grove and Madeleine Wegner, we can see on this chart that the number of papers devoted to small or medium-sized, let's say, cities is quite small among all publications which are devoted to cities. So superstar cities is not appearing, but we have world cities, mega cities, metropolitan regions, and at the bottom, the red curve is about small or medium-sized towns, and you can see that the research activities devoted to these places lags far behind the interest for large cities. And also the increase in publication is less dynamic than for the other category of places. Yeah, please.
Yes, Christophe, we must also notice, even if it's not on the graph, that research on small towns is also under-researched, is quite neglected by rural studies in the same time. Not always by urban studies.
Yeah, in rural sociology, for instance, in rural geography, etc., etc., etc. Okay. So there is the question of why are small towns so much understudied? Okay, that's the question that we're going to explore now. I will quote another French geographer, Roger Brunet, who invented this idea of the blue banana a long time ago. But regarding medium-sized towns, Roger Brunet said that these are real objects. In any country, in any region, there are medium-sized towns or small towns, but at the same time they are unidentified because it's not so easy to map them, to compare them, especially across nations. So that's the first point. The population thresholds are different according to the country which is considered. And another reason for the fog around small towns is that the regional context matters. You have small towns in metropolitan regions and they don't have the same functions or the same dynamic, the same attractiveness as a small town which will be in a very low density region. So if we want to be a bit systematic about this definition of small towns, we should probably refer to the study which was commissioned by Espon 10 years ago and performed by Loris and his team with three complementary approaches to the small towns. We have the morphological approach, so it's a built-up area of a certain size in population and a certain density, but it's also the seat for a local government. And finally, a town must represent a number of equipments, jobs, services, providing facilities to a living basin, the area, the region around. So this approach has been used for many scholars since then, and I will try to apply it to France. So this table is really it's a nightmare for you. I'm not going to explore it too much. But regarding the morphological approach, many years before the Espon Town studies, French researchers, French geographers agreed that a small town is a dense conurbation of a certain size in population. With Loris' works, there was an interesting result, which is that in France, a small or medium-sized town covers, on average, 3 municipalities and up to 42 municipalities. So we have a conflict between the morphological definition and the administrative view. we all know that metropolitan cities are not a unique municipality, but regarding French small towns, a French small town in general is several municipalities, and it means that the mayor of the core town will have to convince his colleagues that it's important to reinforce the presence of health services or retail trade in the very center, and the mayors are not obliged to agree. So how are we going to build a strategy based on an administrative approach which is too narrow? Just to give you an idea of this absurd administrative world in which we live in France, there is a National Association of Mayors of Small Towns, l'Association des Petites Villes de France, and their definition is that a small town is a municipality from a certain size, from a small size. But as you can read on the slide, France has a very large number of municipalities, and many of them are below 2,000 inhabitants, so where maybe the small towns could start. The map here is about the Paris built-up area. There are more than 400 municipalities in the Paris built-up areas. Yesterday you had an expose, a keynote speech presenting the Paris municipality, but there are 400 around. And you can see that all the blue dots, you can see that some municipalities claim to be a small town within a global city region. So we have false small towns in France and real small towns, most probably that we should try to discover using now the functional approach. And there is a recent study which is worth mentioning here. All the yellow dots correspond to centers of services for everyday life, and they have a chemist, they have a nurse, they have a petrol station, they have a supermarket, they have a butcher, they have a post office, they have a college. So there are around 3,000 of them. This study was commissioned by the National Agency for Territorial Cohesion, which had been created a year before and which wanted to explore the left behind places, all these places outside metropolitan cities. So the idea is that such service centers have central functions, and these functions should be maintained or reinforced if possible. And since then, a national program has been launched to revitalize a number of them. In this study, a fragility index has been developed with very classical indicators like the change in employment, the change in population, etc., etc. But we have more interesting dimension like the territorial dependency. It measures the proportion of population living in the area which is dependent on this intermediary service center. You have also that's the fifth indicator, the additional cost of remoteness. It seeks to measure what would happen if the small towns would disappear in terms of function. The people would have to move to another place to get access to the doctor, the nurse, the high school, the petrol station, etc., etc. So all the dots in green are centers in a very favorable situation. And they are all close, from my knowledge, close to very large cities, like Paris, like Lille, like Rennes, like Nantes, etc., etc., maybe around Clermont-Ferrand as well. And the most fragile centers, they are in red or in orange, and they are mostly located far from the metropolitan area. So the regional context is really important to consider. I try not to be too long. How is it going, Hélène? Okay. So let's turn now to some empirical research has been done by various research centers all over France, and I just summarized the main questions that were addressed. The links to the large cities, you can understand why. Their attractiveness to population. There has been some work 10 years ago, but with COVID, of course, there was a renewed interest for rural areas and also small towns, and also questions about the economy. I was struck yesterday by Michael Storper's speech talking about post-manufacturing economy, but in many small towns, there is manufacturing industry, and it's important in terms of jobs. So what is going to happen if we turn the page of manufacturing? Okay. Personally, I conducted some research, and Hélène did as well. I'm interested mainly in the effects of metropolization, large urban regions on small towns. So that's the issue that I'm going to deal with. That's what I call satellite towns. Satellite towns are caught up by the extension of metropolitan regions. Other small towns in France are a bit further away, but they have an excellent accessibility thanks to the highway or even thanks to the high-speed train. And the consequences of this proximity for such towns, it's a debate. Some researchers argue that smaller places can benefit from this proximity to catch some functions, some extra functions. It's the idea of borrowing size from the metropolitan area, but the opposite thesis also exists. Some research argues that if you are close to a metropolitan city, then you have a below average presence of functions, and people will need to go to the large city. It's the idea of agglomeration shadow. Hélène, I will leave you the floor to comment about what I called isolated towns in rural areas.
Yes, so regarding the isolated, more peripheralized small towns, the issues there are dealing with a kind of competition with their rural areas in terms of attractiveness, residential attractiveness, and of course issues of shrinking, declining of population activity. We are talking about industrial economy, which is and used to be an important basis of economy for lots of these towns. And so the core center losing population and also services. Then the issue of centrality function is then for these small towns very important. Their capacity to meet the needs of their inhabitants, but also of the inhabitants of their hinterland, the surrounding rural areas, and also demographic issues like aging of population, which is closely linked to services and the evolution of services. And then centrality, most of studies focus on centrality functions for this town. Okay, just to illustrate the contrasted cases of small towns
in a given region. We have chosen the case of Brittany in the west of France, thanks to a colleague who is based in Rennes, Guy Baudel, is a geographer and also a planner, and he focused on built-up areas having between 2,000 and 20,000 inhabitants. So it corresponds to the Espentown's definition, more or less, of small towns, not medium-sized towns, but small towns. And overall, the population of these small towns has increased more rapidly than the population increase in the region over a quarter of century. So quite a long period. But some small towns have overperformed as compared to others. So in black, the black dots correspond to suburban towns who benefit from their proximity to large cities and dynamic cities like Rennes or Saint-Brieuc or Vannes in the south. Rennes is the capital, the regional capital of Brittany. Then you have around 20 small towns on the coast, and they have a specific attractiveness because they are by the sea or by the Atlantic Ocean. And in the very center, there are around 20 small towns which suffer the population loss. Not a very big one, minus 10% in 25 years, so it's okay. Let's say they are always at distance from the main service and job poles. Another example, also in the west of France, is near Nantes. It's a Clisson. It's a small town that I studied. You can see that it has a rich natural and built heritage. There is even Italian style architecture in this town, and it's very well linked to Nantes, which is a booming metropolitan city. There is a very regular train, and it's only, I think, 20 minutes. So thanks to this, many families have left Nantes and settled down in the small towns, and an eco-district has been developed on the brownfield by, you can see the picture, by the train station. Okay. Very quickly, a second variable to consider, talking about small places, is their economy. A strong economy will bring, of course, jobs to the residents or people living around, but it will also bring, in the French context, fiscal resources to the local governments, and the local government will be able to develop a cultural policy or a social policy thanks to the taxes paid by the firms. And once again, the situation is mixed. It's polarized. Let's say you have manufacturing towns. Some of them, yes, they have seen their industry shrink, but others have gained manufacturing employment in the last decades. This is the case, for instance, of Vitré, also in the west of France. It has been able to sustain a food, automotive, and also electronics industry. And industrial employment has increased, whereas in France, in general, it has decreased. So some small towns are performing regarding their manufacturing system. This is not the case of all of them, of course. On the other hand, Hélène just talked about the towns, which can try to take advantage of catching up income from second-home owners, income from tourists, income from pensioners who live Île-de-France when they retire. It's a national trend which is very well known, and they might settle down in a small town, and this means that the small towns needs to be attractive to attract them. Otherwise, they they have the choice. They will go somewhere else, and Hélène will develop this aspect in a few minutes. Just let me go on with. I'm not very satisfied with the image, but strategy matters. If there is no strategy, no development strategy, and the strategy, of course, will depend on the situation of the small town. It can be a booming one. It can be one which is shrinking. It can be far away from a medium-sized town. It can be close. It can be close to another small town. Okay, all this is important. Okay, but whatever the situation, we can say that there are some fragile links in this axis, which goes from we want to do something, we want to change the situation, and we will implement real projects, changing people's life. Okay, the first fragile issue for me is knowledge. There is knowledge about small towns, but most of the time it exists at a certain moment, or it exists regarding housing or regarding the retail trade, but there is no systematic view and actualized view of what's happening in the place, in the region. And this is a big difference with metropolitan cities or large cities in France, which have agences d'urbanisme with observatories which are able to monitor trends and to anticipate what is going to happen, like aging, for instance. The second point is not at all technical, but it's political. There might be a will in the core municipality to change the situation, to market the town. There might be a vision of the future, but you need to convince the mayors all around that we will win together. And this is not, this is a governance issue. And of course, planners should be aware of this very important issue. So regarding urban regeneration, in some territories, not all of them, but sometimes it's difficult to move from the municipal vision to a larger vision which corresponds to what is a small town, a built-up area and a service center with the rural places all around. Otherwise, if you don't have this shared strategy, you will have projects in competition. Okay. And the third point, and the last point, is that if you have this strategy, you need to transform it into projects which are ready in terms of legal procedures, in terms of financial means, in terms of actors, and it means that there is a demand. And of course, there is much less demand in small towns than in very large cities. The markets are narrow. Okay, now I leave the floor to Hélène for the third part. Thank you.
Thank you, Christophe. So let's comment, a few words about an important element dealing with attractiveness of small towns and French small towns. And a first element is that, let's say, in the last decade, in France, small towns, well, we can say that small towns are in the spotlight. And there's an evolution in policies, discourses, and images. We start from negative aspects illustrated here by the two book covers, interesting from the titles and from the images. So they are in French. The one with the picture is a book written by a journalist, how France managed to kill its towns, if we try to translate, with a picture of a closed bakery. So closing of shops or services is an issue in France. And the bakery, the choice of the bakery, is also a symbol of proximity trade in small towns. And the other one, Peripheral France, is a book which contributed to, let's say, a binary image of the winners, losers, for people and for places in France. So these examples are taken to show the elements of stigmatization and peripheralization process of small towns, which were, of course, studied by researchers. I took an example from a PhD work from Quentin Brouard-Sala, a recent PhD work. There's another one from Julie Chourakis here in Paris on medium-sized towns in, let's say, declining situation. And in fact, this research showed the complexity, the systemic process of devitalization, fragilities, economic fragilities, often from industrial origin, industrial decline, leading to population decline, then high housing and commercial vacancy rates, closing of public services, which is not only a consequence, but also an effect, an impact of national policies, and then spatial and social effects, mainly on the core city, on the core center, and negative representations and identity. The identity issue is quite important in this, for these towns. And this led to a national policy which was implemented at the at the national level, a program, Small Towns of Tomorrow, Petites Villes de Demain, which is a program dedicated to revitalizing small towns. So it was launched in 2020. Here we have a map of the different towns, and even, in fact, as Christophe said, it was dedicated to municipalities most of the time. So So the objective was municipalities with fewer than 20,000 inhabitants that perform central functions and show signs of vulnerability. And they used the survey mentioned by Christophe, but of course municipalities had to apply for this program. But as you can see from the map, the coverage was quite large. Okay, so in fact, all of these small towns of tomorrow are not small towns. Lots of them are market towns, or smaller than small towns. They are not, all of them are not declining or devitalized. Some are located in suburban area of large cities and are quite dynamic, but they are also part of the program. And the focus on municipality is also a big issue for this governance and implementation of the program. So, and in fact, there's the way this program is organized focuses on the core center, which in a large diversity of situation. But I mean, from the origin of this program, lobbying from associations of mayors and data, objective data of devitalization, were taken into account to implement this program, which was not that common in France. I've taken here the image of the program. This is the official image, okay? And I think it's quite interesting because in the way the program is presented, it aims to support local authorities in developing local revitalization strategy. That's a point Christophe mentioned. Incorporating ecological transition objectives. This is the main, let's say, the main objective. And of course, designing local actions. It's a tailor-made program. So each municipality has to prepare and develop its own strategic plan, okay? And we have examples in housing, economic project, social aspects. And talking about attractiveness and narrative, it's also very interesting, this image, the imagery of small town, the way it's represented. You know, it's a small town in a rural surroundings. It's not integrated, not a satellite town, whereas they are part of the program. There's a kind of, in French we say épinal picture, you know, kind of stereotypical image of what is or what should be a small town. Another important element dealing with attractiveness is the new trend, the evolution, new trend and new discourses, which are visible in a, let's say, post-COVID context, post-pandemic. During the pandemic in France and just before the lockdowns, massive flows of people were noticeable, leaving Paris, leaving large cities, and this contributed to a mediatic form of renaissance of small and medium-sized towns. We have here a picture of the COVID effect on medium towns. We had papers dealing with the renaissance, the revenge of small and medium-sized towns, and recent research showed, in fact, that this urban exodus has not taken place. You have here the cover of one of the most recent collective research, Exode Urbain, as Christophe said, it's only in French, sorry. It was commissioned by the let's say, Research National Agency, and they show, in fact, that medium-sized towns benefited from the COVID, but not small towns that much. And places, peri-urban places became more attractive, dealing with the social demand for more space, closer proximity with rural or natural environment, and effects of teleworking. So they analyzed different data, comparing before the pandemic and recent data. So this no massive effects are visible. But this, what is interesting, not only dealing with the pandemic, is this, the reactivation of images and narratives. Here we have an example of a survey dedicated to, as you can see, we translate some of the elements. Question in the future, where would you like to live? And you have, maybe it's small for you, I don't know, but green is for rural, red is for large, and so small towns are would like or wouldn't. And there's a strong demand for rural environments, rural areas, and small towns are also on the map. Okay, looking at the motivation, which are not on the screen, we have elements associated with quality of life, housing, better condition of housing, and quality of life. And what is interesting is that lots of surveys are frequently published and are used, for researchers, but also for local actors in a way to try to understand how what is the social demand for this attractiveness. And dealing with this, we choose elements of the city branding and promotion. It's a work I'm currently conducting with colleagues, and we have here examples of websites, banners of small towns, and it's interesting to notice the importance of images with green components, forests, nature, for cases like I just took example in different regions and different situations. We have cases of Brioude, Ornions, where the small town is visible and its surrounding natural environment. In the case of Passé, it's interesting because it's very close to Rennes, where you mentioned it, and we only have the park. We have even no urban element in this promotion. And we have also images of urban centrality. I took the case of Villefranche-de-Rouergue, where we have the picture of the center, the historical center, and the main square on Market Day, which is an indication of animation, economic, but also social function of the market. And to finish with, in France, we have the example of the POPSU Territoire, which is a research program of research action, applied research. It was launched in 2018, and by now we are counting 51 programs. So it's shaped as monographic work, monographic research with researchers and local actors. And it's also a sign, besides the results, it's also a sign of this new importance given to small towns by the state, by the national actors, and also researchers. And I think, Christophe, that leads us to our conclusion.
Yeah, very quick conclusion because we're a bit short of time. All right. Small town research is necessary, but it's not an easy task. It's necessary because a large part of the European population and the French population has an everyday experience of living near or in between or under the influence of a small or medium-sized towns. Of course, the situation is completely different from a region to another one, and within regions there are many variables. We considered only a few of them. Maybe also we focus too much on this the local politics of the urban regeneration processes, but maybe we should also consider other levels of governance, like the EU, to what extent are EU funds available and used in small towns. What can we say about this national policy focusing municipalities within small towns? Is it relevant? Is it effective, etc., etc.? How is the business sector involved? What degree of latitude is there for small towns to work cross-border, to work internationally, to network, and to exchange? So there are a very huge number of new questions, but maybe you will have also your own questions and reactions to our lecture. Thank you very much.
Hello, I'm Jake Wiersma from the Netherlands. A striking feature in the rural areas of France are these big shopping centers in the middle of nowhere. Can you elaborate something about these phenomena?
Hi. Stefania Fiorentino, University of Cambridge. There's obviously a broad literature, especially in the Anglo-Saxon literature, on left-behind places. You mentioned it, but it seems to me that actually the story of some of these small towns is far from being left behind. So what makes a successful small town as opposed to a shrinking one in the context of France that you have described?
Thank you. Thank you for your questions. Yes, you're right. We have this issue. I mean, in France, I don't know if it's how it works elsewhere, but in the building of these large shopping centers, yes, we have. It's quite complex, but it's the competition with city centers and small trade is quite important. And what is complex is who took the decision, in fact, of building these shopping centers or even retail malls. We have, yes, commercial geography is quite interesting in the case of small towns, and because we also have internet trade competition for local shops, and we have the land issue also, and mobility. I mean, there's a point maybe we should have focused more on a point which is mobility of people, in fact. Commuting, but also moving in a mobile society. People can live in a small town and they can shop elsewhere. They are not, they don't always shop where they live. People work, people have leisure, sports, cultural activities, schools for children, and shopping is a big issue for this, the complexity, in fact, of and the role of local actors can be quite complex because they don't have always the clues to decide. I don't know, Chris.
Yeah, regarding I like the second question, what makes a small town successful? I don't have the answer, or maybe there is an old answer, and maybe there is a new answer. Well, not so new, but there is a geographer which was really the specialist of small towns in France, Jean-Paul Laborie. I didn't mention his name, but it was based in Toulouse, and he made the study to try to find out what were the reason behind the success of small towns. I think it was in the 1980s or 90s, or a long time ago. And his answer was, and it's interesting because here we are in Sciences Po, the accumulation of mandates. The mayor of the small town was also a member of parliament, a senator or deputy, and he was able to anticipate about a new law or a new financial tool which was being discussed, and to have the benefit of it for his town. Now the accumulation of mandate is restricted to a large extent in France, and anyway it's a very old-style way of managing the small towns. Patrick Le Gallès, long time ago, I think 1995, wrote this famous paper on the shift from government to governance. We can apply it to small towns. So today, I would say that what is really important for me is it's the involvement, the capacity to involve civil society, business interest, etc., etc. And this is a field for planning. It means that communicative planning or strategic planning, which has been first experimented in large cities, it can also apply to small towns with the idea of mobilizing stakeholders and identifying what are the resources, the trends, the weaknesses, and the opportunities in the environment.
Thank you very much for your presentation, Valeria Fedeli, Politecnico di Milano. I was particularly interested in the conclusions of your presentation, that I appreciated a lot, about the multi-scalar challenge that is behind the capacity of defragilizing small places, but also defragilizing small places in metropolitan areas. So I was wondering if you ever met, through your research, examples of policies, maybe at national level, that have been able to think together the post-metropolitan or the metropolitan and the small places. So any attempt of national strategy that is not just looking at these two things as opposite, but tightly linked and interconnected. So if you have any example in mind, it would be very interesting. Thanks.
Thank you for the question, Valeria. I'm not going to refer to the Parcs Naturels Régionaux because you know the case, but maybe that would be an example of national and regional policies putting together actors of the rural areas and maybe also the urban places, but taking the national policies regarding cities. In France, we can see and we can regret a segmentation between policies devoted to very large cities, like it includes sectoral policy, like the concentration of hospitals. There is a policy which has decided that there should be only 15 very big hospitals in France in the next 10 to 15 years, because biomedical research needs to be concentrated there. This also corresponds to the policy regarding higher education, with the merging of universities. In Clermont-Ferrand, 2 universities have merged. In Lille, 3 of them have merged. The bigger, the better. It's the idea. And some mayors started to complain that they had been forgotten. So, just like that, the National Agency for Territorial Cohesion was created. I think it was copy-pasted on the Italian equivalent. Our president probably made a trip to Italy, or a think tank worked for him. And this national agency has developed first a policy regarding medium-sized towns, Action Cœur de Ville, And then, oh, there are small towns and the mayors are complaining. Okay, no problem. We develop a policy for over 1,000 small towns. And in the rural areas, the extreme right vote is getting up. Okay, so now we have this new policy, Village d'Avenir. And small town of tomorrow, it's a very optimistic vision of these places, which sometimes are in big difficulty, and also Village d'Avenir, village of the future. So everything is going to work well. And there is no correspondence. These are separate policies. It's a real pity. It's not regional planning, from my point of view.
Loris Servillo from Politecnico Torino. Thank you for quoting me several times. You know, when we went through the whole process of several researches, we were, especially with Christophe, we discussed several times about these two paradigms that affect both research and policy. And I named it like territorial determinism versus single star in the sky, because on the one hand there are a certain tendency of considering the small town just embedded in a larger territorial dynamics, and on the other hand there is a kind of naivety in thinking that cities, those small towns, can have their own path as if they wish to change everything, and they can have if they have their own trajectory. And also this affects also the way you apply in the research, no? The way you conduct the research on this topic. So I was wondering if within your several experiences in France, have you come to a certain in-betweenness in terms of there is a certain territorial path dependency in some areas, or there are some kind of characteristics. Sorry, just also to go back to the question before, say like, can a small town be successful? And one of the issue probably is yes or not. It depends where it's located, and probably also. Thanks.
Yes, you're right. I mean, local actors have to take into account the real problems, and in Auvergne Massif Central, where I'm living, we have good examples of declining, shrinking industrial small towns. I have Thiers in mind, which used to be the capital of cutlery industry, and so this has been declining, but it's still very industrial with production employment. And Thiers local actors, they try to how can I say, to use all the different possible tools dedicated to employment, dedicated to urban renovation, dedicated to social actions, and of course the characteristics of the small town are quite different than nearby thermal spa small town with tourism, with other elements of attractiveness, and the regional context is also very important. So yeah, this is still very important. First element of answer. I don't know, Chris, if you want to. Can I just add that tomorrow morning there's a special session on left behind places with most of the presentation dedicated to small towns, so it could be a good continuation.
I remind you to grab a cup of coffee anywhere, anytime, and try to find your room and ask students and staff for directions.
Maybe you can remind the lunch.
Okay, I remind you that the lunch will be in Saint Thomas, across the street where we had the cocktail yesterday, unless you want to participate to the French cuisine brown bag seminar. In this case, you will find the lunch bag directly on the spot.